What a great piece of craft and imagination and scoring. You just really hit a lot of points in my list of criteria. And at the same time, you're not just doing this as a chore, you're also showing us your personality as an orchestrator. And it's so great to get another entry from you in this ongoing series of orchestration challenges, and to just see what is possible for you as an orchestrator. All right, so but you didn't really submit this so that I could just praise you up and down. You want to know how you can improve and everything else. So let's sort of start off with some general thoughts. I can see efforts to balance certain elements. For instance, keeping the horns down a little bit, and sort of balancing these little toot toots in the middle of the bar in the clarinets, and so on. I feel that there are times in which certain essential gestures, certain colors are being they're kind of being underscored a little too much. And that will be more of a concern on the next screen. But I know why you're doing it. You're trying to really get a beautiful world of color in your scoring here. And I can appreciate that, but I think that sometimes it's just a little too far back in the sound picture. If you know what I mean, these triple P, it just seems it's a little too far back in terms of the adding the coloration, and then also vibraphone, which tends to get swallowed in a lot of parts. There are some problems. I'm going to touch on this one because I'm afraid I'm going to forget it. There's some problems here. Here you've got vibraphone, which the way that you've got the scoring. I mean, it's fairly clear that you intend this to be the left hand kind of rotating back and forth, and then with the right hand going pling right here. But I think that most vibraphone players would probably prefer this to alternate between hands. And then, seeing as how your horns are so strong here, not to mention adding the clarinets and so on, everything else, that really the soft vibraphone notes, they really cannot be heard all that clearly. And in fact, this seems to disappear into the texture without really having much clarity. I would say it might be better to score this so that the hands were sharing these alternating notes, and then these octaves were played with both hands, and just drop one of these pairs of notes and then just jump back down, because nobody is going to hear this anyways, right? So it would be better to go yada da 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 pling da 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 da. Do you know what I mean? I think that would work a whole lot better, seeing as how this isn't going to be heard anyways. And I feel that unless this makes more of a meaningful contribution to the sound picture, you could just even cut it anyways. If the flutes are going to be going all the way up to forte piano here, and then mezzo piano in the oboe, which is going to be a pungent instrument, with the overtones from the clarinets and the horns from below anyhow, then the only way to make this work is to bring up the volume to at least mezzo forte. But then again, that's just adding to the whole problem of just heavily mixed dynamics throughout, right? So, I just really wish that there was a way of simplifying the effect of, I know what you're trying to do here. I feel some of it may or may not be practical. I've already, I think, lectured at length about the problem of having mixed dynamics, heavily mixed dynamics across a score, where you have players who are sitting close to each other, where one of them has got a mezzo forte and the other one has got a forte, And the players not really knowing anything about either person's part might be listening to the other and thinking, the oboist might be thinking, wow, that's not a very loud forte that the flute is playing. Maybe I'm playing too loud. Or the flutist hearing the oboist play a nice rich forte and thinking, well, boy, that is a loud mezzo forte that they're playing. Do you see what I mean? The problem with really mixing, like heavily tweaking the dynamics in every single part, even between sections, is that it really takes, if it gets to be too fiddly, then it really takes a lot of work by the conductor to get the right, to really make sure everybody knows what each other's parts are saying at the particular time, right? And there are a few things that are a little confusing to me here. Here you've got a crescendo, like you've got a swell here, which I know you've got this separate part right in here, but the dynamics, the dynamic curves or the dynamic arcs are really different between these two instruments, which are doubling each other, right? And you're sort of using this to kind of sweeten the cellos, but I feel that the result here will be, you'll get this, you're sort of up, down, but here you're getting the slur across and a push into it at mezzo forte. So it'll be as if, you really feel the sense of falling off a cliff here. That will be more prominent in the listener's ear than just simply if the parts had doubled with the same dynamic, right? So I think you intend to have some sort of accent, some sort of pulse at the beginning of this, and then the cellos to continue on as if it were a note played on a piano, right? With the attack of the hammers hitting the strings and then the sustain. But I think that the problem with this is just like with the way that the wind instruments operate, that the sudden disappearance of the rest of the bassoons while this note is being held is going to just be more noticeable than the effect that you're going for, right? I mean, it might be easier, I think, to just have like the violas pluck to get that same sense of attack and sustain. It's things like that. So it's just very heavily, there are lots and lots of what I feel are somewhat idealistic, like assuming that the orchestra has a lot of time to rehearse these things and to really go over them and to balance them and to talk to the different sections and so on and so forth. And in that case, even at that, there probably would be a lot of adjusting by the conductor and the players. So, all right. Having said all that, let's go back to the beginning of the page. All right. And just talk about, I'll talk about the good points too. All right, yeah, because it is really a fantastic score, really beautifully imaginative. All right, so the violins basically interpreting the entire piano part, tremolo, with first flute and first oboe in the foreground, doubling the octaves along with vibraphone, motor off. That's very cool. And then this little reaction here by the clarinets. And then just the violas coming in. And this was lovely right in here. The warmth here from the horns. I'm wondering what it would sound like without the crescendo. Do you know what I mean? Just letting these players warm up a little bit and just letting the horns stay at pianissimo. Right, and then maybe having a little bit of a swell right in here. Does the second flute really need to go all the way up to forte piano? Because, of course, this is going to be getting nice and loud and then suddenly dropping off to softer than the oboe, which will start to absorb it. Same thing with the strings. We'll basically absorb what's left of the flutes. All right, and then continuing on, da, 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 da. And of course, I've already talked about the differences between attacks and phrasing styles and articulation and so on and so forth. But I do like the fact that you are not just throwing a big phrase mark over, or just copy pasting the phrase marks from the piano. So you're giving the players a more reasonable kind of bowing pattern, right? Up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, right? So that this for people who don't know is a slurred staccato. So it would be a staccato under the same bow, the same direction of the bow, and you can end up getting a kind of it's almost a portato, but not quite, right? It's more of a staccato than it is a portato. It's sort of mezzo staccato, if you know what that is. So, it more or less works. The only thing is, of course, the value of this note being so long, right? That it really becomes almost a portato. That would be my observation on that. Some people might score this so that this would just be an eighth note, and then there would be a rest in between, and then followed by this, so that it's the same direction of bow, but it doesn't have the connotation of being a sustained note under a staccato articulation, right? Okay, so for instance, this is perfectly fine because they're the same note value, and one of them isn't a fairly long note. Right, so here we have the crescendo up to forte, and I feel that that's very effective. And it's great to keep the horns in the background. They could have possibly been mezzo piano or even mezzo forte, I don't know. But yeah, but so long as everybody goes diminuendo at the end, I would say it's even fine to have this contrast of dynamics between these players, but the horns really do need the same diminuendo as everybody else to make this work. And I think that the bass clarinet as well should have a hairpin pulling out of there, right? So that the timpani can really stand alone here effectively. And of course, you can hear that the vibraphone note gets almost completely buried by the texture. I mean, just as a general rule, if you have horns playing in an exposed way, and you have vibraphone at the same time in a middle register, the vibraphone will basically just get swallowed up by the overtones of the horns. And and of course here you have a peak, right? You're rising towards this this chord right in here, okay? And the problem being that, like, this D minor chord, and then you have this D octave here, or D major chord, and this D octave here, is that the overtones from this will also swallow these D octaves here, right? Even at a softer dynamic, and especially as you have not indicated any kind of increase of volume for your vibraphone. Another reason why I was suggesting bringing up the dynamic here. Now, just another comment is using these strange note heads. I really don't know of any professional concert and percussionist who really needs to read those. I mean their instrument is percussion, right? So indicating a percussion instrument by using a strange note head is not necessarily helping them, unless there was some reason for this diamond note head that was a different technique than what they were usually playing. But they don't need. I mean, they have read thousands of scores now, not hundreds, but thousands of scores where they just got a regular old common or garden note head for playing triangle rather than a square or a triangle shaped note head. And same thing for tam-tam, even less need, right? I'd be more interested to know whether or not you intended the tam-tam to let the tam-tam vibrate into the next bar, or we're going to stop, just like we're really definitely going to stop here, right? That would be more my concern rather than adding a strangely shaped note head to it. All right, now moving on. So here we're getting into, once again, very very moderated dynamics, and I mean, you can hear the problem immediately, right? Now, having said that, I really love this whole idea of scoring the the horns and the trumpet very softly. But I just really feel that we can barely hear anything else but these beautiful warm horns right in here and trumpet. Now, okay, you may have not read, or excuse me, you may not have watched my my video where I railed against A1. Okay, there is no A1. Okay, there is. You have to tell us which player this is. If you mean that this is the first trumpet player, then just write this for us, right? Just write us a 1, right? Roman numeral 1 or Arabic numeral 1, usually putting a period after it. But yeah, so just the first player, right? And then here, you don't need to write A2 because obviously this is 2 voices. Now, if you intend for the top voice to have first and second trumpet and the bottom voice to have third trumpet, then you should just write that. Just go 1 period, comma, 2 period, and then below write 3 period. And that tells the copyist, the conductor, everybody involved that you are going to have 2. But there is absolutely no reason for you to write A2 here because it's written out, right? So yeah. So just avoid A2 if you're doing multiple voices on a staff, right? And of course, you could have done A2 here without the second voice scoring because it's identical all the way to the end of the passage, right? So you didn't even need that second voice. You could have just said A2, but I would still say number 1, and here if you have 3 trumpets, I'm just going to jump back here. No, 2 trumpets and C. So yeah, so if you have 2 trumpets, then all you need is A2. But if you had 3 trumpets, then you would want to write 1 period, comma, 2 period, right? Just to let us know that you're only using the first and second. So yeah, so absolutely zero need for this marking, and just write a 1 here. All right, so I'm getting really off track. What I'm trying to focus on here is that even at piano, and just a crescendo to mezzo piano here, it's almost impossible to hear any of the subtleties that are happening in the winds and strings, right? So, I mean, I cannot, in the mock-up, I can barely hear this, and just in my own mental orchestra, I also cannot hear it, right? I feel that this is it's not a question of having to choose one or the other. You just bring up the dynamic, right? I think that if the whole orchestra were playing piano here, then I think that you absolutely could have this balance. Probably even better, to get a perfect balance, the strings would have to be mezzo piano, but then that would ruin you want this sort of very airy kind of an effect here. You're saying divisi sul ponte a punta ad arco, so right, you're using the tip of the bow, which is very, very delicate. But once you start getting up to mezzo forte, then the players are going to just drop the whole punta d'arco thing and start using the middle of the bow, right? So what I would say right here, sul ponticello a punta d'arco, right? Now also, punta sul ponte. I would say like this, just the louder that you get, probably the more you want this to be ordinario. I would say, not just the part of the bow that you're using for the tremolo, but also the position over the strings that you want, right? I know you kind of want this sort of glassy sort of a sound, but how long is that supposed to go on, right? At what point does sul ponticello and punta d'arco become ordinario, right? See, I'm not seeing any kind of correction of it, right? So the place to put it, in my advice, would be right here, okay? As you start to push into mezzo forte, just normalize everything. And once again, just give your percussionist normal note heads, right? They're not asking anybody for strangely shaped note heads, so they don't need them. It's not necessary. Okay. All right. So I feel that having said all of that, I feel that the conception of what you're trying to do here is very strong, right? I think that it is a really cool idea. These beautiful shivering notes above and so on and so forth. Now, ideal situation probably would be if this were scored on winds rather than on brass, right? And then you wouldn't have to worry about the balance so much. The ringing overtones, even at soft dynamics, of these instruments wouldn't overwhelm the strings so much, right? But you are kind of also crippling the ability of these strings to speak out by scoring them so low, right? So it's not just that this is pianissimo and it's a very delicate effect. It's also that the position of the tremolo or of the notes, doesn't matter if the tremolo or not, the position of the notes is so close to what is going on in your trumpets and horns, right? So the proximity alone is enough to bury them in the texture quite deep, right? So, I mean, if you go back and listen to the mock-up, you'll hear, I mean, the mock-up in that case is telling you the truth. And then the same thing is sort of happening right here. You have this beautiful effect right in here with the strings. And I know you want this to be more of a background effect with the winds in the foreground, but the problem is that the delicacy of this slurred staccato, of this mezzo staccato, is just making it disappear once again into the notes that are positioned around it, right? So it's the same, we have a lot of the same harmonic pitches in your winds as you do in your strings here, and they're just basically getting swallowed by the winds, right? And of course in this horn as well, just boom boom, it's like it really is it is not really balancing out the right way. So like the constituents of the scoring are fantastic, right? So it's just a matter of wrestling it into a place where it will all balance. So the first thing that my first instinct is that everything should be piano. So that would be like my first suggestion, is just bring up the dynamics so that everything is the same dynamic, just to start with, right? Then the next suggestion would it be possible for this to sound up an octave or in a different configuration? I know that you sort of want this to be the kind of continuation of the interpretation of the left hand figuration. Okay, there's too many Asians in that sentence, but you get what I mean. So so that would be another way of bringing out this beautiful, delicate, fairy-like sort of wisping of notes, would be to put them up an octave or maybe invert them upwards, or just a bunch of different ideas, right? That to possibly bring them into the realm of the audible. Now, yet another thing would be really try to match the slurring of the strings and the winds wherever possible. So, I mean, here you can't quite help it, because you want the handoff to the violas, right? So you're just leaving a rest here in your cellos, whereas here you're slurring across three notes and so on. And but I just feel that there needs to be some kind of unity. There needs to be some way of the winds and the strings speaking together wherever possible to make the part stronger. Whereas if the parts are just constantly doing something different from each other, then you don't get the unity, you don't get the smoothness of the line, right? So that is another problem. And then just also articulation styles, right? Why are the horns just basically playing normal notes here, and then the same note, the same pitches, doubling in your cellos and violas? Why are they playing tenuto, right? Is it an attempt to get them to match the horn in terms of the dynamic or the strength or whatever? So I just really feel that the whatever the articulation style is, then you once again you need some unity there. All right. So going forwards, we have this big beautiful bum bum. So this is where I would actually, what I would say if the horn is playing in its top octave and it's doing something prominent, here's where I would have the first and the third play together. Now, what you're doing here in terms of the first and the second sharing this harmonized line right in here, that's all perfectly fine. It is, I would say that is recommended. I would want them to work together so that they would get absolute perfect cohesion in some of this. But right in here is where I would possibly reharmonize this so that the third was playing this C, and the second was playing this A, and then here you can kind of go back to the other scoring that you were doing. It's tempting though for I would almost want the first horn to be playing this B, and then maybe the second and third to be playing this internal part, and then the fourth to be playing this down here. But anyways, the main point is right here. If you really want this to be A2 and to be very, very effective and so on, I would really bring in the third horn at this point. That is really, third horn doubling is much more characteristic of what you've got happening here. But do you actually need two horns on this? Do you need that really rich kind of a sound? I don't know. I don't know if that's necessary. What if that were just a single horn, right? And what if everybody were the same dynamic here? Then maybe all of the parts would balance better. But by having the horn in the foreground, you have to think the horn is already twice as loud, or twice as has twice the projection of all of these winds and strings, right? So it is just going to, a lot of what they're trying to do will get swallowed with the resonance of the horn. So you just really have to watch out how you bring the horn into the foreground, especially giving the strings a mezzo piano dynamic, the upper strings, right? So that's the main culprit in the reason why they're disappearing right in here. Okay, so getting on to this last bit, so just continuing problems with that. Now here, I felt that this started to open out a little bit in terms of the effectiveness of the scoring. But once again, you're I could barely hear this at all in the mock-up, and also just mentally, it doesn't feel like it balances to me. So, you've got to do something here. If this is really important to you, then you have to bring it out more. I would say just allow these to all be the same dynamic. Don't assume just because one part is subsidiary to the other that it necessarily should be marked down dynamically. To an extent, a lot of the scoring that you're doing here, Jaap, is scoring that actually works at everybody at the same dynamic. So by bringing one part down and the other, that actually messes up the dynamic rather than, or messes up the balance rather than perfecting it. Do you see what I mean? So a lot of the weaker instruments are being marked down way too far, and so they just become, ephemeral, or they just don't really seem to matter in the tone picture. But I mean, it's a shame because this scoring is just so beautiful. I mean, I love the combination of the pizzicato cellos with the staccato bass clarinet and the bassoon taking over that sort of little middle voice interjection between phrases, and I just think it's really worked. And then you have the sort of written out anticipatory roll both times in the vibes, and then this little trade-off here from cellos to oboe. It's solo cello to solo oboe, and then this handoff here as well, and so on. I think that all works really nicely. And the same thing here, bass clarinet trading off to clarinet, and then once again to flute. So this all works fine, right? And this little tinging here by the vibraphone is also very nice. And then here you have this push, right? So I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of this. The bass starting loud and then the melody actually pushing into it. It just really feels like there's so much weight on the lower part of the sound picture that the melody coming in dynamically late is I feel its absence. The absence feels a little awkward to me. That's just my particular impression. And of course, this should be tied, shouldn't it? Maybe you left out the ties. And I feel the dynamics should be the same, right? These should both be mezzo forte by the time they get here. Okay. And then, yeah, you know, if you're going to mark up the clarinet to forte and keep the violins at mezzo forte, then you're going to feel like you're falling off a cliff by the time you get to here, right? Because these strings are still going to be playing mezzo forte, and then suddenly the clarinet has disappeared. Shouldn't you have a diminuendo here or something so that its absence, its eventual dropping out, isn't so obvious? Anyhow, I mean, it's all beautifully scored and so on, but I'm just not so sure that this approach is practical of just having very heavily moderated dynamics as opposed to more universal dynamics that rise and fall on the strengths of the instrument and its register and so on and so forth, which by their placement imply a natural balance. Right, so I think that might be a better way to score this, and the honest truth is that using the scoring that it's all possible in the scoring approaches that you have scored. It just needs to have more balanced dynamics, and certain background foreground things are probably an overstatement, right? That would be my overall critique. But you know, having said that, just a beautiful effort and just wonderful to get another score from you, Jaap. You know, you have been a familiar face in these orchestration challenges since possibly the beginning. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at some of our earlier challenges, but yeah, and I just would be particularly excited to see what you would choose to do in our next 3 challenges. The one coming up in 2023, which is going to offer a choice between 2 particular kinds of things, and then the 2024, which is going to sort of return to a certain period, a certain vibe of music with a piece, a very unexpected piece by a composer who's known for doing other kinds of things. And then our 10th anniversary in the following year, the 2025 orchestration challenge, which is going to be an orchestravaganza. So I would really love to hear your contributions to all of those if you are still able to do this, if there are no crises or changes or any other kinds of things that would cause you to not be able to do this. It would be a shame. But anyways, there's some great stuff coming up, and I mean, wow, what a great score that you sent me. And you know, despite all of my picking around and tweaking and suggestions and everything else, I do feel it's very, very strong. And you know, just a few little adjustments, I think it would just be absolutely perfect. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon, and for everybody who is watching up to now. Please give Jaap some great feedback in the comments below this video. And I will see you very soon with the next video from our Semibrev entrance. See you then.